The RTX 4070 has recently launched. It's Nvidia's new mid-range. It's $600 GPU. It does offer increased price to performance and features better power consumption, more VRAM than its predecessor. However, a lot of people were, like myself, were hoping the price would come in lower and it would do more to disrupt the $500 GPU market. Unfortunately, it hasn't really done a lot to lower the $500 prices. So cards like the 6800 XT, and can we say AMD, can we get some new GPUs for the 7000 series, please? Some new RDNA 3 GPUs? Anyway, the RX 6800 XT is currently about $540 if I look at PC Part Picker buying new, and it does come with some advantages over the 4070, along with a lot of very similar performance. It does have 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12. In this video, we're going to look at, does it make sense to pay the extra? Well, let's double check, but last I checked, RTX 4070s were in stock at their MSRP. It looks like they still are. So is it worth the extra $60 to buy the 4070, or should you still buy the 6800 XT? Now, today's video is going to mostly focus on the gaming performance of these GPUs in the latest games, Unreal Engine 5, ray tracing, upscaling, different levels of ray tracing, latest games that use a lot of VRAM, all sorts of things. But you should also consider the productivity use cases, which is not going to be the primary focus of this video, but I should mention right of the way, right up front. In your workflow, sometimes you will have a program that is programmed to support one GPU manufacturer more than the other, and that tends to be Nvidia. Now, there's many products that support AMD just as well or better, but in many programs, they program for the market share leader, and that is Nvidia. Now, a lot of things like AI right now is literally changing the world. Everyone's job. The world is going to be such a different place in 6 months, let alone 6 years from now. And AI is going to be a major factor in that. And a lot of AI models, I should mention, are actually, if you're running them on your own PC, going to run better on NVIDIA. Again, some work well on AMD, definitely something to consider. And today's sponsor, Hubspot, has a free, completely free. Guys, I love a sponsor that just gives you something completely for free. Link in the description and pinned comment to this ebook about using generative AI. So this is specifically focusing on scaling your content operations. Maybe you want to be a YouTuber. Like guys, 2.5 years ago, I didn't have a YouTube channel. Never thought I would have one. Even if I did have one, I didn't think I'd have 120,000 subscribers. It's crazy how fast this stuff can go. AI can help with literally like anything you are doing these days. I wish I had time to tell you about all of the amazing topics in this ebook. There's a really bunch of interesting stuff here. One of the really important ones would be writing good prompts. For your for the AI models, that you really want to get good info on that. And another one I want to highlight here is, okay, I am still a high school teacher in addition to doing the YouTube channel. Is there a risk of plagiarism with generative AI? In schools, this can be extremely obvious, but also you need to worry about that if you're using this in business. How are these models trained? Are you going to have plagiarism when you do it? Anyway, there's really good info here. I don't have any more time to talk about it. We need to jump into the benchmarks, but check the link in the video description. Download this ebook completely for free. Let's hop into the benchmarks. You can check the system specs in the video description, and I'll give you some final thoughts on which one you should buy at the end of the video. Tons of new games will be using Unreal Engine 5, although right now all we have to go off of to test it is Fortnite, since Fortnite is developed by the developer of Unreal Engine. Now, Unreal Engine 5 comes with some really exciting new features like the Lumen lighting system, the Nanite system to, stream in things without all the pop-in of levels of details, virtualized shadow maps, all of that. But it's also very demanding. But we can see that both the 6800 XT and the RTX 4070 are averaging a little over 60 FPS in my test here, which I'm using the replay feature to play back an actual game of Fortnite. There's no built-in benchmark here, but you can replay on different GPUs and graphic settings and all that. We see they're basically tied, with the 6800 XT having a small lead in the 1% lows, coming out to about a 7% lead there when I compare the 1% lows at the end of the benchmark run, and again, tied in their average FPS, which, like I said, is around 60 FPS. So you get around a 60 FPS experience, although certainly dipping below it on both of these GPUs at 1440p epic settings. Now, I can't guarantee that every Unreal Engine 5 game will perform similarly. Now, you can hardware accelerate the Lumen lighting system, which is kind of a software-based ray tracing. However, like I said, you can hardware accelerate it. This makes it a little more accurate, but also takes a performance hit, although the 6800 XT takes a larger performance hit to the base baseline than the 4070 does. This is expected results, where Nvidia has stronger hardware acceleration for ray tracing than AMD does. So with that in mind, we see the RTX 4070 take a 9% lead in the average and a 5% in the 1% lows, although in heavier ray tracing workloads, you will certainly see a larger lead for the 4070, and we absolutely will test that in this video. But the Lumen lighting system hardware acceleration is not super demanding, so that's good to see, and it makes the performance gap between the two GPUs not that big. However, upscaling is another advantage for the Nvidia GPUs. In Unreal Engine 5, at least in this current build, we only have temporal super resolution to use on AMD. This build of Fortnite does not have FSR support, although there certainly will be FSR add-ins to Unreal Engine 5. Now, DLSS quality and TSR quality are rendering at the same native input resolution here and trying to reconstruct a 1440p-like image, although DLSS quality certainly looks sharper in motion, looks better. And the 4070 has a 12% lead on average here, although I'm pretty sure that's mostly due to the ray tracing rather than the upscaler itself performing better, other than in image quality. Now, if we drop down to the high settings at 1440p, this still uses Lumen, Nanite, Virtual Shadow maps, but Lumen and Virtual Shadow maps are reduced to the high setting, along with some other settings. We can see both GPUs are capable of a high refresh rate 1440p experience using these new features at good settings, just not maxed settings. And we're seeing that they're both averaging well over 90 FPS with 1% lows, a significant lead for the 6800 XT, a 16% lead here. And we're seeing only a 4% lead on the average results. So definitely a lead for the 6800 XT here, although both are performing well. Now, dropping down to 1080p EPIC settings, we see about a tie in the average results, and both GPUs giving respectably high refresh rate experiences here, with an 11% lead in the 1% lows for the 6800 XT. I'm curious if that's at all smart access memory related. We also see the 6800 XT reporting more system memory and GPU memory utilization. So I'm curious, Nvidia has to whitelist ResizeBAR support. So I have ResizeBAR enabled, but if Nvidia hasn't chose to whitelist it in this game, it won't be utilized. I'm curious if AMD allowing it just in any game when you turn it on, I do have it turned on in all the games here, if that's part of what's seeing the advantage on the 1% lows. Just curious. Anyway, if we go up to 4K EPIC, we can see that both of these GPUs could deliver, a 30 FPS 4K experience. It's basically a tie. Realistically, if you'd want to be using these GPUs at 4K in demanding new games in Unreal Engine 5, things like that, they're usable, but you can see that if you want to max them out, it's going to be more of a 30 FPS experience. I don't even have the hardware RT turned on here, but if you reduce the settings a bit and upscale, they're certainly manageable 4K GPUs. It's just don't go in there expecting to just crank all the graphic settings and get a decent frame rate. That's just not what you're going to get. Now, next I want to look at ray tracing in more detail, but before we do that, let's establish baseline performance without heavy ray tracing. So we're looking at Cyberpunk 2077 here at its 1440p Ultra, no ray tracing preset. And we can actually see that the 4070 underperforms in this game compared to a lot of other games. And we see the 6800 XT with an 11% lead on average performance at the end of this benchmark run, and a 9% lead in the 1% lows. You can also see on the Nvidia GPU, I'm using the Nvidia overlay to monitor the average PC latency. If you look down at the bottom of the screen, that's going to be more relevant when we compare it with frame generation, because we're also going to look at that. So basically, we're establishing the baseline performance in this game, where the 6800 XT is ahead, albeit at higher power draw, if you take a look at the watt differences here, but it is ahead, until you enable ray tracing, and then there's upscaling, frame generation, all of that. So let's look at the new features, because the feature advantages are the big advantage for the RTX 4070. So here, we are seeing on the left, the 6800 XT, with FSR2 at the quality upscaling setting, trying to run ray tracing at the Ultra preset in this game, not the RT Overdrive, but just the original RT Ultra setting. We can see the 4070 DLSS quality in the middle at the same settings, getting around 60 FPS, whereas the 6800 XT is playable, but down in the mid-40s. A lot of the time. And then on the far right, we see the 4070 using DLSS quality plus frame generation to get to around 100 frames per second. Now, this is why the input latency is important to look at the bottom, because frame generation increases the smoothness of the image to look like 100 FPS of smoothness with some added image quality artifacts, which are less noticeable the higher your base frame rate is. But it does slightly increase the latency rather than decrease it. Although I will say that the latency around the 40 to 50 milliseconds is completely playable. But when I'm comparing the average performance of a 45% lead, I'm doing that without frame generation. And same thing with a 41% lead and the 1% lows. Now, if we go ahead and look at native resolution without upscalers, neither GPU does a great job with Ray Tracing Ultra. If we drop down to the Ray Tracing Medium preset, which includes local shadows and includes sun shadows and some of the bounce lighting, although does not include the RT reflections, and is definitely not the path tracing mode, we can see that the 6800 XT is good for over 30 FPS, but probably not the way you'd want to play the game. And the RTX 4070 is good for, mid 40 FPS range. Still probably not the way you'd want to play the game, but here we see the direct results compared with a pretty heavy ray tracing workload, although not the heaviest. The 4070 is 27% ahead on the average FPS, 30% in the 1% lows. I think more realistically with this heavy of a RT workload, you would want to be using upscaling like we showed when looking at the RT Ultra preset. Now, again, it is important to note that in lighter ray tracing workloads, like the RT Low preset here, then the performance is much closer between the two GPUs. Here, we're seeing the 6800 XT good for around 60 frames per second, and the 4070 good for a little bit more than that, with the 4070 only winning by about 3% on average and 2% in the 1% lows by the end of the benchmark run. So what's going on here? Well, I think because the AMD GPUs lose performance quicker than the Nvidia GPUs when you're enabling heavy ray tracing workloads. The lighter the ray tracing workload, the less performance you lose. And the 6800 XT had a performance lead when not using ray tracing here. So basically it just lost its lead. They're basically tied with the low preset, but the low preset here is just RT local shadows. It doesn't have sun shadows, doesn't have the reflections, doesn't have the bounce lighting. So honestly, it's not very exciting, but this is more similar to the performance numbers we saw when using the hardware accelerated ray tracing in Fortnite with Unreal Engine 5 Lumen being hardware accelerated, things like that. Let's look at some other games that have a less demanding RT workload. So Resident Evil 4 Remake, here we're looking at the 1440p, just max preset when you go to the graphics presets, which does include ray traced reflections. We can see that the 4070 is leading by about 9% and in the average, about 10% in the 1% lows, both of them giving high frame rates. And this game does use a lot of VRAM. However, at 1440p, both GPUs do seem to be just fine. Going up to 4K, they're actually both delivering around a 60 FPS experience at the max preset, including the ray traced reflections, although now the 6800 XT has a 5% lead. You can also see the 6800 XT going over 13 gigabytes of VRAM usage at times, so it is possible that the 4070 is being slowed down a bit by some VRAM spillover. This game uses way more VRAM than most games do, so something to keep in mind. Now, dropping down to 1080p at the max preset, we're now seeing a 12% lead for the RTX 4070 on average, with actually a 29% lead in the 1% lows. But you can see that spike on the frame time graph right there for the 6800 XT. That's probably related to the 1% lows there. And honestly, either GPU can get a little spike every now and then. But overall, we are confirming that 4070 is a little bit better at ray tracing in light workloads. Now here's Forspoken, which using its maximum preset, which is called Ultra High and does include some ray traced shadows and ambient occlusion. We're seeing a 16% lead at 1440p for the RTX 4070. This is another game that uses a lot of VRAM, but the 12 gigabytes on the 4070 does seem to be doing a good job here. Now, I'm not measuring the 1% lows in this game because the benchmark run goes through some load screens that mess up the 1% lows, so we'll not compare those. Jumping up to 4K, the 4070 drops to a 6% lead, so they're basically tied, and honestly, neither GPU is doing an amazing job here, averaging down in the 30s a lot of the time. But again, only a small lead for the 4070 in that workload. averaging 37 versus 35. Now, if we drop down to 1080p at this ultra-high preset, which includes the RT, we are seeing both GPUs actually giving a very playable experience, with the RTX 4070 at a 14% lead. And again, lots of VRAM being utilized here. 8GB GPUs like the 3070 get absolutely crushed here. It's nice to see the 4070's 12GB giving it enough to work with to get its lead here. Now, let's look at some new games that are not using ray tracing in their maximum preset. And actually, The Last of Us Part 1, I was on patch 1.0.2.0 when I did this testing, gave me a surprising lead for the 4070 here. I wasn't expecting it to be winning by 21% on average and 24% in the 1% lows, but those are the results I got. I did make sure the Ultra preset was applied properly. And I did restart the game, make sure it was applied, and there was no upscaling enabled. So there you go. But when I went up to 4K resolution at the Ultra preset, both GPUs struggled, and now the 4070's lead dropped to 8%. Also, if you look at the GPU VRAM and system RAM, I think that the 4070 is spilling over its VRAM a little bit here, and its system RAM usage is going up, and that's slowing it down. So while it had a large lead when it wasn't constrained by its VRAM, it now still has a lead when a little bit of its VRAM spills over, but it's less of a lead. That's slowing it down a little bit. And dropping down to 1080p, we're once again seeing the large lead for the 4070, actually going up to 29% lead here. Again, these were repeatable results. I'm not quite sure why the 4070 is so much faster in this game, but it is the result that I'm getting here. However, the 1% lows are about the same, although this game can be very CPU limited at higher frame rates. So it's possible that the CPU limit could be influencing the result there on the 1% lows especially. Now, looking at what I think is one of the best, next-gen only console games, best-looking games, I should say, Plague Tale Requiem, fun game too. We're seeing them about tied. So here at 1440p Ultra in a, PS5 and Xbox Series XS console exclusive, one of the best-looking ones available. They're both delivering over 60 FPS, and they're basically tied. I really think anything within 5% of each other, you would not notice the difference in person. So once again, basically a tie. Jumping up to 4K Ultra, still basically a tie, 3% lead on average for the 6800 XT, nothing that you'd really notice. And what you would notice is that at 4K, I think you would want to turn down settings or use upscaling. This is a game that does feature frame generation. I think it works very well in this game. So I do think that if I had tested the 4070 here with DLSS quality plus frame generation, you will get a better experience in this game using the 4070. And I do think that frame generation is very usable here. Although again, at 1440p, they were both giving good frame rates, and if you're playing at 1080p, they're both delivering such high frame rates, there'd be no reason to upscale or use frame generation. And once again, they're both basically tied, although now the slight lead has shifted to the 4070 with 3% on average and 5% in the 1% lows. Again, though, Plague Tale Requiem, I think one of the best looking games out there right now. And both GPUs doing well at 1080p and 1440p here, basically tied at the native resolutions. But let's test some other stuff. How about Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2? I'm using the built-in benchmark run to capture the footage and results here, and I'm doing the balanced preset at 1440p rather than the extreme preset, because I think that's more similar to how people would actually play this game. Usually in a competitive shooter, people reduce graphics settings in order to get a higher frame rate. We see the 6800 XT with an 11% lead here in both the average and the 1% lows, both GPUs delivering a high refresh rate experience though, and this does line up to previous testing where AMD GPUs seem to overperform against their average result in other games in Call of Duty. So we're seeing a 9% lead at 1080p balanced in the averages, and a 10% lead for the 6800 XT in the 1% lows. And again, this is the 1080p balanced preset. With both GPUs doing a great job, the 4070 getting us around 200 FPS and the 6800 XT closer to 220 FPS. Both of them have good 1% lows, very playable, but the AMD GPU certainly does have a small performance lead that you could notice. Now, going up to the 4K resolution, still using the balanced preset though, rather than the extreme preset. We're seeing the 6800 XT actually push its lead to 18% on the averages and 16% in the 1% lows. I do think that due to the limit, I don't think this is a VRAM capacity issue. Neither one of them is near its VRAM limits, but this could be a memory bus issue where the 4070 has a pretty low memory bus, although it has a large cache, but at the higher resolutions like 4K, I think that can not scale as well. Now, let's test out some Unreal Engine 4 games, because while a lot of game development will move to Unreal Engine 5 soon, there's a ton of Unreal Engine 4 games out there. Returnal is a PS5 exclusive on consoles, so no backwards compatibility worried about on older generations. And Unreal Engine 4, we're seeing the 6800 XT basically tied, but with a 4% lead on average and 2% in the 1% lows, both of them delivering a high refresh rate 1440p experience here at the Epic preset. Dropping down to 1080p at the Epic preset, we're again seeing them basically tied, a 2% lead on average to the 6800 XT, both of them with a high refresh rate experience. Now, this game does offer ray tracing, but I just stuck to the Epic preset, which does not include ray tracing by default. We already did a lot of ray tracing enabled testing earlier in this video, so both for my time's sake and the video length's sake and all of that, we're not going to enable ray tracing in every single game that does have it available. Returnal at the 4K Epic settings, both GPUs are actually giving a pretty decent frame rate here, close to 60 FPS, although the 6800 XT is a bit closer with a 4% lead on average. But yeah, this game, despite being a PS5 exclusive, does perform very well on PC, and is an I'm curious here again with the larger memory usage on the AMD GPU if Smart Access Memory is helping out there at all. Anyway, if we move on to another Unreal Engine 4 game with the Callisto protocol, I think this is one of the best looking Unreal Engine 4 games in my opinion. And it's also one of the most demanding at 1440p Ultra. In that little corridor of death, as I call it, we see both GPUs absolutely struggling with 1% lows down around 30. But once we get through that, the average for 1440p Ultra is going up. By the way, if you're comparing to my results in this game yourself, notice the Ultra preset enables FSR2 by default. This game doesn't have any DLSS, but I turned that off, so we're looking at the native 1440p results here. They're basically tied with a 3% lead for the 6800 XT, and dropping down to 1080p, the 6800 XT still has a 3% lead on the averages, and now has a 2% lead in the 1% lows, although both of them have bad 1% lows, but that's just how this game is. It's really difficult on the 1% lows on every GPU. That just kind of is how the Callisto protocol is. This game is an AMD-sponsored title. However, I haven't really seen AMD GPUs get an outsized lead, and honestly, in Unreal Engine 4, a lot of times Nvidia GPUs have kind of outperformed AMD relatively, which is why I thought it was interesting that that wasn't necessarily the case in Unreal Engine 5. Jumping up to 4K Ultra, I think realistically both GPUs would want to reduce settings or use upscaling. Like I said, FSR2 is available in this game, although not DLSS. Here we're looking at the native 4K Ultra resolution. The 1% lows are particularly bad, although a 13% lead there for the 6800 XT, although that is only about 2 FPS. It's just a large percentage since you're off of such a low baseline number. And then the average results, again, 8% lead for the 6800 XT. Once again, we're seeing that at 4K, the 6800 XT does stretch its legs a little bit more than the 4070 does. I think the 4070, again, that low bit bus harming it a little bit. Now, while I was focusing on the newest games in this video, we're going to look at God of War, not that it's super old, but also because it's a DX11 game. So as one of the latest and greatest and graphically demanding DX11 games, thought it'd be worth testing to see if we saw anything unusual. Not really anything out of the line of what we're seeing in other games. Both GPUs giving a high frame rate, 4% lead on average for the 6800 XT, a little bit higher than that in the 1% lows. Moving up to 4K Ultra, both of them are completely playable around 60 frames per second, and they are actually just tied on my average results and my 1% low results by the end of my testing run here. So yeah, not seeing anything particularly crazy on the DX11 results. And if we drop down to 1080p at the ultra settings, the only interesting thing is I do see a 17% lead in the 1% lows for the 6800 XT, only a 4% lead on average, so basically a tie. And again, I'm wondering if there's any CPU entering the equation on the 1% lows, just due to the extremely high frame rates we're seeing here. The higher your frame rate, the more likely the CPU is to be influencing the results rather than the GPU. So that could explain that. Now, I also wanted to test out a Vulkan game. So Red Dead Redemption 2 at the 1440p max preset is a Vulkan. I'm running at Vulkan. It could also run in DX12. And I'm not measuring the 1% lows through the load screens in the benchmark run here. So I'm just going to report the average results off the end of the benchmark run, which shows a 7% lead for the 6800 XT. And moving up to the 4K max preset, we're seeing both GPUs delivering over 60 FPS much of the time, with a small 5% lead for the 6800 XT. Once again, I am not measuring the 1% lows on my testing here. Again, this benchmark run is very long and goes through some long load screens. I wish this is kind of a side note, but I wish they'd do something to improve the speed of their load times. I feel like on a fast SSD and fast CPU, the load times should be better here. But anyway, that's beside the point. Dropping down to 1080p maximum preset, we're seeing a 4% lead for the 6800 XT. So yeah, it doesn't seem like there's anything particularly noteworthy to look at in either DX11 or Vulkan. So I think by this point we have firmly established these GPUs. Let's get some final thoughts on which one makes sense to buy. So in the current market, the 4070 costs 11% more money than the 6800 XT. So which one does it make sense to buy? Well, the first thing I'll mention is they don't cost the same amount of money. It is a $60 difference, and if 540 is the absolute most money you can spend, I will say that that actually puts it up against, from the Nvidia side of things, the 3070, which is $530 on the cheapest one, or the 3070 Ti, which is $570. And so if you compare against those that actually cost the same, then I think the 6800 XT is a no-brainer, better option unless you need it for productivity workloads, all of that specifically just have to have Nvidia. So I will say the 6800 XT actually, I think, crushes the competition that costs the same, but the 4070 at just $60 more is certainly something you should consider. For 11% money, does it justify the price increase? Well, I think these benchmarks have established that when you are not using ray tracing or upscaling techniques or frame generation or any of that, if we're just looking at the raw performance of the GPUs, the 6800 XT is offering about the same performance with 4 extra gigabytes of VRAM, and it costs less. So if that is all you care about, if all you care about is the raw rasterized performance and some additional VRAM capacity for less money, then get yourself a 6800 XT. But what I want to focus on this video is, would it make sense to pay $60 more? But how about before we get to that, if someone offered you these two GPUs, here, you can have them for free, which one, but you only get to pick one, which one do you want? Again, I think there are some people who would be swayed by more VRAM. I'm gonna pick that one. I don't care about ray tracing, I don't care about upscaling, I don't care about frame generation, don't care about any of that. Some people are just gonna pick the 6800 XT. I am not one of those people, despite my videos talking about VRAM usage in games going up, especially the like really recently, there's been a ton of games using a lot of VRAM. If I was given these GPUs for the same price, I would absolutely take the 4070. I think that 12 gigabytes of VRAM, first let me say this. I think that these GPUs are best targeted at 1440p resolution rather than 4K. Not that you couldn't use them for 4K, but I think they're best targeted at 1440p. And I think that 12 gigabytes of VRAM at 1440p right now is fine. Would I rather have more for more future-proofing? Yes, but that's not the only distinguishing factors between these two GPUs. I'm not scared of 12 gigabytes of VRAM at 1440p right now. Am I saying that there won't be any games that use more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM at 1440p? No. But guys, most people agree that playing games at maxed out settings is actually kind of stupid, and it's a good idea to turn down a few settings. Usually when you turn down settings, VRAM decreases. It sucks if textures have to be the one that you turn down, but a lot of times, it's easier to do than that, and also using DLSS 2, not frame generation, but DLSS super resolution, does also decrease VRAM usage. And I think that it's a very good technology that does look very good at 1440p. It does look better than FSR2 does, especially at 1440p. At 4K, at least at the quality setting, they're a little more comparable, but also at the more aggressive settings. In other words, there's more to this than just which one has more VRAM, and I'm not that scared of 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That being said, I am someone who doesn't want to hold on to a GPU for 6 years. I'm probably going to sell it when the next gen comes out to help fund a purchase of my next GPU. So maybe your calculus on that would be a little bit different than me, but I'm okay with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, although I really wish the 4070 came with more. Now, again, we have the better image upscaling with DLSS 2 versus FSR 2, and we have frame generation. I am also the perfect target audience for frame generation. I primarily play single-player games, turn the graphics settings up pretty high, as long as I can still get a decent frame rate. And as long as the game's responsive enough that it feels good to play, I'm not looking for the every little millisecond of competitive edge. So if frame generation looks good, and I'm on a high refresh monitor, but I would turn up the graphics settings to a point where I'm getting about 60 FPS, I do notice that 60 FPS doesn't look as smooth on my screen as 100 FPS does. Well, frame generation can take you in games where it's supported and it exists and looks good and all that. It can take you from 60 FPS to around 100 FPS in motion fluidity with latency that still feels pretty good, at least to me. I mean, I played with it, I have it, I use it, and I do use frame generation if I can get a base frame rate that's at least around 60 FPS. If the base frame rate is high enough, the image quality artifacts aren't usually very high, although there are games like Spider-Man where I didn't really like it. Things move very quickly in that game, so I think there's a lot of difference between each frame, which makes the generated frame between the two real frames not look as good. But in many games, especially slower single-player games, things like that, I think frame generation is very usable, and it is a feature that I actually like, and I do think it's worth paying a little bit more for. So basically, and then there's ray tracing. Let's get into that. There are a lot of games with ray tracing nowadays. In some games, it does make a noticeable difference to the image quality, and it can, especially when using DLSS 2, and then even throwing frame generation on the top, the 4070 is strong enough to use ray tracing in a lot of games and get a very good playable experience that many people would consider better than playing with those features turned off. So I'm saying that there are many reasons why the RTX 4070 could be considered over the 6800 XT, and not only just be better despite the slightly lower VRAM, but could be just worth paying the extra $60. So I'm just gonna say it, if it was me buying a GPU in the $540 to $600 range, I would spend the $60 more if I had it available, and I would buy the 4070. I'm going to get about the same performance when it's not using ray tracing or upscaling. If I'm upscaling, I'm going to get better image quality than FSR2 can deliver. If it's a game that supports frame generation and it's a single-player game where I would want to use it, I think I will, and it will help me take advantage of my high refresh rate monitor. And there are games where I will use ray tracing and I will be able to get significantly better frame rates when I'm using it. Is that worth the 11% extra cost? I think so. Also, it comes in with noticeably lower energy consumption. So because the 4070 draws less power, then over the course of the years that you own it, you will slowly gain back some of the price difference. Now, you know, how much does that matter to you actually? I don't know, but in terms of the actual price of owning the GPU over the lifespan of time you own it, it will lower your power bill, and so it will eventually make up a $60 difference. How long it takes to make that up depends on the energy prices where you live and how many hours per day you use your GPU. Additionally, I'm a content creator and I often render my videos in AV1 encoding now that it's available. So for me, having the AV1 encoder on the 4070 is a big advantage, and I would actually use that. I understand that in straight up gaming performance, many people don't care about recording their gameplay or sharing their gameplay or having AV1 encoding. For me personally, that is another value added feature. And in other workloads, like I've mentioned, there are many apps that are just programmed for the larger market share, and the larger market share by far is Nvidia. So many productivity apps focus on being programmed with Nvidia acceleration in mind. Like I said, many of them still work fine or as well or better on AMD. Some of them you can even take advantage of the extra VRAM on the 6800 XT. So if you're going to be using this for a professional workload, you should look at the actual apps that you use and look up reviews on them with AMD and Nvidia GPUs compared to see if there's a difference for you in your particular workflow. There's no way I can test every single app in this particular video. So with all of this in mind, I am coming down on, I think it's worth the extra $60, but I'm also going to throw this in at the end. I think the fact that there's any reason for the 6800 XT to just have the 4070 launch and not significantly disrupt the 6800 XT's price and position in the market is really sad. It's really disappointing. So I'm not trying to argue that I'm really excited about the 4070. I think imagine how different this comparison would be if the 4070 cost $500 or less. If the 4070 actually cost less, now imagine in a world where they had designed it with a different bit bus and it had 16 gigabytes of VRAM, or maybe the 12 got doubled to, the 24 or something like that. Imagine a world where it had as much or more VRAM as the 6800 XT and cost $500, delivered the same rasterized performance, better ray tracing performance, better upscaler and frame generation. Then we would be living in a very different world, and I think I would be a lot more excited about the 4070. So I think I would spend the extra $60 to get the 4070 if it was me. If you are just way more worried about the VRAM capacity or saving the $60, maybe 600 just isn't in your budget, then I think the 6800 XT isn't terrible. And if you recently bought a 6800 XT, I don't think you need to feel bad. The 4070 costs more and doesn't deliver that much more. Well, really, it's about the same raw performance unless you're using ray tracing. So I don't think you need to rush out and trade in your 6800 XT for a 4070. I think it's disappointing that the 4070 didn't make a more compelling argument for buying a GPU right before it launched being stupid. It didn't, right? Imagine it $100 less, $150 less, maybe with a little bit more performance and VRAM. That would be a much more exciting product. But anyway, I feel like I've gone on long enough. Remember, there is the ebook on generative AI in the video description, completely for free from Hubspot, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.